On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, the Houston Texans lose to the Miami Dolphins 30-15. Tua had opportunities to sit early, while that was a bad look for the Houston Texans defensively, and there was no change. Day and day, night and night for the Davis Mills-less Texans offense.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Monday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. I'm John Hickman, joined by Cody Davis, here to discuss the 30-15 loss the Houston Texans suffered on Sunday against the 8-3 Miami Dolphins. Currently, the Houston Texans' updated record is 1-9-1. Kyle Allen, like I said, day and day, night and night. There was no change between Kyle Allen and Davis Mills. 26 of 39 from the field, 215 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, sacked 5 times for a loss of 41 yards, a 4.1 QBR, a 67.8 quarterback rating. And I'll get into this, but what I'm about to tell you guys may set this whole show on fire. Damien Pierce, 8 yards off 5 carries. 5 carries for the man that moves this offense. Jordan Akins, 5 catches, 61 yards and a touchdown. Brandon Cooks, 5 catches, 59 yards. Nico Collins, 6 catches for 44 yards. Defensively for Houston, had an opportunity to get after Tua Tagovailoa, especially when Armstead went down right before the half. Christian Kirksey had a sack. Malik Collins had 2 sacks, and Jake Hansen had a sack. They also had a sack from Mario Addison, 7 tackles for a loss, and defensively 2 pass deflections. One of the biggest issues for Houston on Sunday, if this was One Blood, the remix for Houston, this song would be still playing over and over and over again. Abysmal on third downs. 2 of 13 on third down against the Miami Dolphins. A total of 58 plays for a total of 210 yards on 13 drives, averaging 3.6 yards per play. 5 penalties for 45 yards and 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and the 1 fumble loss. Time of possession a little bit over 27 minutes on the day. Cody, fans, listeners, this was a horrendous performance. 30-0 at halftime. 4 touchdowns in the second quarter. Their first 25 plays, ladies and gentlemen, 32 yards. So that's not even a yard per play. Well, it's right over a yard per play. And Cody, the words from Lovie Smith were what take us through the press game, post press game conference with Lovie Smith. Take us through that, because Sunday's performance was horrendous. It warrants firing later today on Monday.
Was it really horrendous, or was it really an embarrassment? Was it really unwatchable? Because John,
yes.
But here's the thing. I've gotten to the point where I'm expecting this. Coach Lovie Smith, when he finally announced the quarterback change on Friday, he said part of the reason why he went through the quarterback change because he felt the team, and the coaching staff, they felt that placing Kyle Allen in place of Davis Mills on the center will give this team a jump start. But John, here we are, 2-3 days later, and we are still talking about the same exact thing for the Houston Texans. The one issue that I'm starting to have with Lovie Smith, and I'm not about to call for his job because, John, you know me, I don't believe in that. You can give me all the looks you want, but I'm going to continue to stand by that. But the one issue that I've had with Lovie Smith over the last couple of weeks, possibly since the loss against the Tennessee Titans, where things really just look like this season took a turn for the worse for the Houston Texans, is the fact that he always want to focus on the positives. And in a game where you were down 30-0 at halftime, in a game where the opposing team starting quarterback, now understanding there was a little bit of an injury scare towards the end of the second quarter where Tua kind of like went backwards. I believe he had got sacked from Malik Collins, and the tackle looked kind of scary, but thankfully Tua was okay. But after the first, maybe second drive of the third quarter, the Miami Dolphins decided to sit Tua with the team up 30-0. And with Tua no longer in the game, the Miami Dolphins went fumble, punt, and of course the last drive they secure the first down in order to secure the victory. But within that time stretch where Tua sat down, who was also an MVP candidate, by the way, the Houston Texans recorded 15 points. And during his post-game press conference, Lovie Smith wanted to focus on the 15 points that the Houston Texans scored. Now, John, I get it. I understand it. You go from being down 30 to 15. But how much positivity can you take away from that, knowing that the opposing team starting quarterback, and not only that, they started limited the amount of snaps of Jalen, Tyreek Hill, everybody else that's important for the Miami Dolphins. Even on defense, a lot of their most important players started to take time off. Like, I don't understand how can you focus on the 15 points scored in the second half when the opposing team wasn't even playing their best players. And not only that, John, listeners and viewers, as I just mentioned, Lovie Smith said you wanted to give this team a jump start with Kyle Allen, but there was nothing different between what Kyle Allen does and what Davis Mills does. The first half is terrible, and by the time they start getting into an offensive rhythm, the game is already out of hand.
Right.
I'm speechless. Tua in the first half threw for 278 yards, finished the game with 299. The defense, once again, this Tampa 2 defense, I knew Tua and the Miami Dolphins was going to tear the Texans defense apart. There were several times within the first quarter, I counted 5 times where Tua's target was just wide open, just sitting in the soft part of that defense. And I'm speechless, but I'm not shocked, if that makes sense.
There's a water cooler that had some anger taken out on it by Jerry Hughes with that kick. Also would love to mention, actually, Kyle McNair was in Sunday's press conference, which I think may have been the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in an out-of-town game. And when Lovie Smith talked about Kyle Allen and, the possibility of him continuing starting, yes, to your question. We're not going to put out a guy, give him the first start, and start yanking things. We let a guy play. We want to see him. We got to eliminate those turnovers, but I thought he did some good things throughout the game. I think there's a combination of a couple of things, and then we'll move on. There is still no identity for this franchise. And this identity, the lack of this identity has created this atmosphere of putting out what sounds good and withholding the truth and maybe the things that should be said. And this is a game where you look at the play calling, right? I mean, if you're going to switch out your quarterback and go to Kyle Allen, then I definitely would expect the play calling to be a whole hell of a lot better especially if you consider when a vet that's been in the league maybe 5
But
years.
but do you really, John? Because when I'm sorry to cut you off, but when I was watching that game, especially in the first quarter, I'm looking at this and thinking to myself, okay, there's a reason why Kyle Allen is a backup quarterback.
Well, that's
That's
true,
just me.
and the majority of that play calling really does still have to go to the offensive line, who had another terrible day. But we'll get into all of that and more on the following segment when we talk about the absence of Damien Pierce and break down some more of that defense on today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we are sure you are going to love. Find Block Forever now wherever you get your podcasts. That's Block Forever wherever you find your podcast. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. He gives football fans an inside look at the game through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities of all time. Khalil does a good job of sitting down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get the real about what happens on the field and behind the scenes, inside locker rooms, during team meetings, and back at the hotel as well. You will even hear Christian McCaffrey talk about his love-hate relationship with fantasy football, and Juju Smith-Schuster gives his most honest opinions about other players and positions in the league. Catch the Block Forever podcast and series available wherever you get your podcasts. Available now on Audible. Get in the game. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers out there. I really hope the water cooler. Listen, right now, the frustration is boiling over. Is pretty hot for this franchise. You got guys that don't look enthused to play football.
No.
There's a lot of guys at moments and times, especially within the last 2 to 3 weeks, it just looks like they're out there kind of waiting until the season is over with so they can go about their summers, right? A lot of these guys, man, they're coming from winning organizations, and I don't know how you're going to sell free agents to this team, right? And so for Houston, the draft right now is the biggest hope, right? The Browns won on Sunday, so that kind of messes up the chances. They're still going to get their Browns pick, but the Browns won, so that improves the Browns record, which hurts the Houston Texans' chances of getting a top 10 pick. But they secured the number 1 pick once again. Another Sunday securing the number 1 pick. But I got to tell you, 5 carries for Damien Pierce is inexcusable. I like the fact that Darray was able to get some more carries. Darray got the first carry of the game for the Houston Texans, and Rex Burkhead went down with a big injury. It was hard for him to walk off the field. That really was kind of scary the way his body kind of folded like a whiplash. And, of course, he is of age. So, hopefully nothing serious is going on with Rex Burkhead. But for Damien Pierce to only get 5 carries in the game, and I don't really care how much you were out of the game at one point, he is your best weapon offensively. And I mean, I can't include not Titus, but Landry Tunsil, because I still think that he may be the overall best player on the offensive side of the ball, even though he did have a drop. They tried to put you in a position to get a big boy touchdown, and you dropped the pass. But overall, when you look at when this offense really looks good, when I go back to the Eagles game, and when I go back to certain moments throughout the year, like the Chargers game, right, or the New York Giants game, there's moments when your offense looks, pretty good, pretty competitive, and a lot of that rides on the shoulders of Damien Pierce, the rookie running back, which, again, I mentioned before, I can't remember a time that an offense was based around a rookie running back. That it doesn't go anywhere without that rookie running back. Even when Zeke was running the ball as well as he was early in his first year in the league, still had Romo, still had, other weapons. So for the rookie, I think it's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. However, this is the NFL, and he got for the 4th round draft pick, he got his contract was a little bit more because of how Nick worked things out. He got to get the ball. 5 times, again, it's inexcusable when you take a weapon away, when you're taking the weapon away, right? Not when the other team is doing it. I can see if it was 12 to 13 carries and only 10 yards. But when you take away another weapon, then that does make your play calling look very suspect. And I think that's a direct shot. I am calling that a direct shot to Pep Hamilton because 5 carries for Damien Pierce isn't, it's not going to cut it.
I don't really think that the lack of carries that Damien Pierce had was the Houston Texans taking him away. I really do believe that it was once again due to the inabilities of the Houston Texans offensive line being terrible for the second consecutive week. Is once again why Damien Pierce finished the game for the second consecutive week with only 8 yards. I mean, John, you saw it every time that they gave him the ball. The opposing team's defensive linemen, linebackers, they was already in the backfield killing Damien Pierce. And we talking about it a lot here on this show about, kind of like, well, at least I do, kind of not really protecting Damien Pierce, but don't put him in harm's way, especially when you know your offensive line is not getting the job done. Look, I do agree with you that him finishing the game with 5 carries is inexcusable because once again, even with Kyle Allen as this team starting quarterback, it once again showcased why Damien Pierce is so important and valuable for this organization, and especially on the offensive side of the ball. Because like Lovie Smith said in his post-game press conference, if they are unable to sustain the run, they cannot move the football. And that's what we saw for another consecutive week. However, John, once again, going back to another point that I talked about last week, Kenyon Green has already established himself as this team's, if not best, the second best run blocker, and he had another suspect day. Not only that, they favor Justin McCray over him. So you have to look at the correlation here to where if Kenyon Green cannot give this offensive line that extra push in order to get Damien Pierce involved, then it makes sense why they kind of limited Damien Pierce in this game. But once again, you're looking at a situation where Damien Pierce has only averaged 8 yards over the last 2 games. So it's not really the play calling fault. It's more so to the fact that their offensive line can't really do anything.
As boring as the game was on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins, it's always better whenever you can add a little extra edge to the games. And what better way to do that than with prize picks, where you can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their prize picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people, just you versus the projections available. They also offer projections on not only football, but NBA, NHL, college football, men's college and women's college basketball, soccer, WNBA. If it's out there, you name it, they got it. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, safe and fast withdrawals, and currently operational in over 30 states. So download PrizePick app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. Thank you for making the Locked On Texans your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this Recap Monday installment of Locked On Texans. And
it's hard out here, man.
It's hard out here. It's hard out here for Texans fans and reporters. I tell you that for sure.
Especially for reporters, man. Lovie Smith is he's been a little hot the last between Brian T. Smith, and he also had a mini. I'm not going to call it a blow up because I think he was still very respectable. But on the press conference on Sunday, he was like, hey, you know, I'm gonna get back to you. I feel like somebody else talk a little bit. But it's hard out here, man.
Yeah, it's really hard, John. And on tomorrow, I want us to look at how much in danger are the Houston Texans going into this offseason, because I love the point that you made of how hard it is going to be able to sell free agents to come here in the offseason. And I truly do believe that that was part of the reason why this season was important for them to look competitive and at least better than last year. But I really want to revisit that for tomorrow's show. But
I
John,
wonder if Bryce Young may pull an Eli.
he might.
No, I'm serious. Listen, for Houston, I mean, can we agree that Lovey and Pep is leaving? Not leaving, they're gone, right? I mean, and I know Cody. We've talked a little bit more so off camera than we did on camera about how internally it seemed past tense like Lovey Smith's job was okay. I don't think that may be the same feeling as internally. I believe that there may be a change of heart now. Cal McNair was at the press conference, but I don't think they can go into next season with Pep Hamilton as quarterback, as your OC, even though he has done a very good job coaching up some of these young QBs coming out. When we look at Andrew Luck and Herbert, and I think this may be the perfect situation because like Luck and like Herbert, he's dealing with a top QB prospect, and you would always want to deal with a top QB prospect who has been considered a top QB prospect since the day he walked on campus compared to Davis Mills, who has only played a handful of games in the past 5 or so years. I get that, but I don't think they are going to make it to next season. And if I'm Cal McNair, I'm trying everything I can to see if Sean Payton wants to be a part of creating something different here in Houston.
He damn sure not coming here. I mean, you have to take a look. Like, I know when he went to the New Orleans Saints, I mean, the Saints was coming off arguably their worst season in franchise history, but they did have an opportunity to sign a quarterback named Drew Brees, who showed a little bit of promise, but he was hurt, and we all know how that.
I mean, but we look at Drew Brees, Drew Brees 5'10", like we look at Drew Brees in New Orleans, and if they get the number 1 pick, which they currently have, and if they go out there and draft Bryce Young, then hey, Sean Payton, make magic, baby. Already got your running back. We can go out there and find you a scat back running back. A lot of people want Bijan Robinson. I don't think that's going to happen. You can go out there and get some more offensive weapons. And by the way, what's more of a selling point? Coming to play for Lovie Smith in an outdated defense, or coming to play for Sean Payton?
I get your point, but I just don't see Sean Payton trying to rebuild an organization like he did in New Orleans. Plus, by the way, ownership was basically on one accord, with those with their staff, their coaching staff, team personnel, everything. We all know when you take a look at the Texans, it's damn near a whatever you want to call it. Like, I don't know if Sean Payton will come here. Like, I love the thought of it, I must say, but I don't think Sean Payton will come out of retirement to join the Houston Texans. And not only that, you also got to keep in mind, if Sean Payton comes back, the Texans are going to have to give us some of that draft capital because the New Orleans Saints still holds his rights.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
And
I also don't think the Texans can afford another coach contract. And if Sean Payton's come out of retirement, then that contract going to be pretty steep. They're already paying David Culley. They're still going to have Lovie Smith under contract. A third contract would just be entirely too much because I think, like the Raiders situation, why they can't move on from McDaniels is because they still owe him money and they can't afford it. Houston is in such a bad position right now that I think the best outcome is to leave Lovie Smith as your head coach. And it's another optical of optics, right? Leave him as your head coach, but you got to just allow him to be the face of the coaching staff. You got to get an innovative defensive coordinator here in Houston. You got to get a different offensive coordinator. I don't think Pep has done – I don't think – like, again, I think it's still 70-30. I put blames on Mills, a lot of blame on Mills for this season. But Pep, if Bryce Young is your pick, the only thing I can see working out is if you want to stay here in town, you take a demotion, come back to quarterback coach, and we got to get another offensive coordinator here in town.
And once that proves my point of last week when I said, John, I think the Houston Texans would have been in a better position had they kept David Culley. And I'm not saying this for wins or loss, but if you kept David Culley for another season, that would have given you an opportunity to finally go out and orchestrate a real coaching search and get the head coach that you desperately want and need. It's just a bad look overall, man. This is
the 2022-23 Houston Texans team. Listen, I think by this time last year they had already secured 2 more wins under David Culley.
Yeah, I want to say this time last year might have been the game when they had defeated the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. And I think they had like 4 interceptions and stuff. I believe we are around that, but of course, in December, they end up beating, of course, Jacksonville again, and they also beaten the Los Angeles Chargers. But that's another scary part about it. Like, John, you remember going into this season, the stretch of games where the Houston Texans just finished playing against the Giants, playing against the Eagles, playing against Miami, playing against Washington, like that at the time was looked at 4 games where you can say, you know what? I don't see them going 0-4, but they're going to get at least one of these games. It's going to be a toss-up. It's going to be competitive.
Were 2 games in the preseason that they could have won.
Now, you look ahead to next Sunday. This is arguably the worst stretch of games for the Texans. I mean, you're going to have the Cleveland Browns coming in town with somebody with a new quarterback under center. We're going to get into that later on in the week, but you have the Kansas City Chiefs. You have the Dallas Cowboys. You have Tennessee again. Like, you have Jacksonville again.
Jags. And by the way, listen, Trevor Lawrence looked phenomenal against the Ravens. The Houston Texans may not win another game, man.
That's where I was going. Like, I don't see this organization winning another game. This is just bad.
Yeah. But if you're like me, you're enjoying the ride. Hey, all roads lead to the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft. And I have an eerie feeling they're going to botch it.
How can you botch this? The only way it could get botched is, like you say, if Bryce Young pull Eli Manning. That's the only way.
And I've been advocating for Jalen Carter because I think he is that dominant of a player at his position. But I can't listen. Drafting a quarterback should be the priority for the Houston Texans. Like,
that's why I said, how can you botch this? And if you don't get, Bryce, that's CJ.
Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I was told that they really do like CJ. And CJ does bring some things from a physical standpoint that Bryce doesn't, but mentally, Bryce Young is just a much better quarterback. Be sure to check us out throughout the week here on the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube under the name Locked On Texans. Follow me on Twitter, the name right there, John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTYDAVIS _24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.